headquarters in New York City. This is Charlie Rose.
Mr. President, it's a pleasure to be in your city, first of all, this city where you started your political career. To be here in Russia, which is a great country with a historic past and an important role to play in the future, and its demand that its history and its size, its culture, and its military strength and its possibilities give it a big role. There are big issues that can only be solved if Russia participates, and you will play a definitive role in that. And help us understand, as you see it, where are we? How do we get there? And where do we go from here?
First of all, I'd like to thank you for agreeing to work with us here today to be the moderator of this meeting. This forum is called the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, so probably it would be better to concentrate our attention on the economic issues, but I agree with you, without finding a solution to a number of acute international crises, hardly any advances can be achieved. We've been talked about Ukraine repeatedly. We understand there is no evading this question. But, you know, we always talk either about Ukraine, about something related to Ukraine. Several years ago, we talked about the crisis in Iraq, crises in different other countries. We're talking about what has already transpired, but we never talk about why it has happened. But if you want to talk about it, which is evidently quite important, I should like to start with this very issue. Why is there a crisis in Ukraine? I was quite confident that after the bipolar system went into oblivion after the collapse of the Soviet Union, certain Western partners of ours, particularly the United States, were in a kind of euphoria. And instead of trying to create a new situation, good neighborly partner relations, they started to explore new, free geopolitical spaces, well, free in their view. And that's why we were witnessing the expansion of NATO eastward and other phenomena. I was always wondering why that was happening, and finally I arrived at a conclusion. I thought that some of our partners were under the illusion that after the Second World War there used to be one world order, and now that the USSR was gone, they thought there was vacuum which had to be filled. And I think that is not the right approach towards finding a solution to these issues. And that's why Iraq happened. We know, and our partners agree, that there were errors committed in Iraq. But still, it happened once again in Libya and now in Ukraine. We are not the original cause of those crisis phenomena which are happening in Ukraine. They should not have supported the illegal coup d'etat, anti-constitutional coup d'etat, as well as a forceful seizure of power, which finally resulted in a serious confrontation in Ukraine and a civil war, as it were. What has to be done now? Today, no doubt, the agreements reached in Minsk, the capital of Belarus, should be observed. Let me emphasize, if we were not content with something, we wouldn't have put our signature there. But we have put our signature under those documents, and we will seek their full implementation. I'd like to draw your attention to this fact, your attention and the attention of our partners, but we cannot do that unilaterally. And I'm repeating it over and over again. They're telling us Russia has to influence somehow the situation in the southeast part of Ukraine, but that is not enough. Influence has to be exercised also on the central authorities in Kiev, and we cannot do that. This is the avenue which has to be pursued by our Western partners, the Europeans, the United States. Let's work together.
Yeah. What do you want the Kiev government to do?
We don't want them anything to do. It is the Ukrainian people that has to want something from the government, either to do or not to do. We believe that to achieve a settlement, the Minsk agreements have to be implemented, and the key issue here is no doubt the political component, and there are several elements to the political settlement. First, the constitutional reform, and the Minsk agreements say that quite clearly, either with providing an autonomous status or stipulating for a decentralization, as our colleagues put it. Everyone understands what that is. Our European partners, the Germans and the French, have explained what this decentralization stands for, and the Donbass and the Kiev authorities are okay with that. Secondly, the law on the special status of these territories, the Luhansk and Donbass unrecognized republics, has to be enacted. It has to be enforced. It has been promulgated, but it is not being implemented yet. And to that end, a decree of the Verkhovna Rada, the Ukrainian parliament, has to be adopted. And that what the Minsk agreements stipulate for. Formally, our key friends have done it. But once this decree was adopted by the Rada, they also introduced amendments to the law, as a matter of fact, bringing it to naught. So instead of manipulations, they have to start practical work. Thirdly, there has to be a law on political amnesty. You cannot be engaged in a political dialogue with people who are in danger of criminal prosecution. And finally, a law has to be adopted on municipal elections in these territories, and these elections have to be performed. All that is stipulated in the Minsk agreements, and I'm drawing your particular attention to that. And all that has to be done in concert and in coordination with the representatives of the Minsk, southwest part of Ukraine. Unfortunately, too much time has passed since the signing of these agreements. Now, a direct dialogue is required between Luhansk, Donetsk and Kiev. That is what is missing. And finally, an economic rehabilitation of these territories has to be launched. I have said that repeatedly. The excuse of having no money doesn't work here. And the current Kiev leadership believe that this is the territory of Ukraine, that Ukrainian citizens reside there who are entitled, say, to disability allowance. Then they have to do something. They cannot refuse to pay these allowances, otherwise they are violating their own constitution. All that has to be implemented, and not just in words, but also in practice.
As you know, the United States believes that you are arming the separatists and you're encouraging them, and that you are using the Russian armed services, and that adds to the conflict, that heightens the emergency. And many people worry that it's tending towards some new Cold War.
You know, Cold War is caused not by local conflicts, but by global decisions, like the unilateral withdrawal of the United States from the ABM Treaty. That is indeed a step which pushes all of us towards a new spiral of confrontation, because it shifts the global security system as to regional conflicts wherever they happen. Curiously, warring parties always find arms somewhere, and the same goes about the eastern part of Ukraine. What I want to say is that if today's situation is resolved via political means, no arms will be required. But to achieve that, there has to be goodwill as well as the willingness to be engaged in a direct dialogue. We want to facilitate that. We're going to facilitate that, but we'll never agree if anyone somewhere will try to speak from the position of force, either with the police or the militia or special forces or armed forces, until armed units and the so-called nationalist battalions arrived in those territories, no arms had been present there, and there would have been no arms in those territories if they tried from the very outset to resolve the issue via political means. Arms arrived there after armed forces started to be used against those rebels. They're trying to resist, and once they try to resolve it by political means, no arms will be required.
What are acceptable borders for Ukraine, for Russia? What borders are acceptable for you?
Что вы имеете в виду, когда говорите о границах?
What do you mean when you're talking about borders?
Географические границы?
Geographical borders or political borders?
О чем идет речь?
What are you talking about specifically?
Что касается сотрудничества, мы всегда
As
говорили
for
и продолжаем
cooperation,
это
we've
говорить. Здесь нет
always
ничего нового.
said, and we're going to say that in
При всех
future, there's
сложностях
nothing new about
сегодняшнего
that.
дня,
Despite all the
считал
difficulties
всегда и продолжаю считать, что
of today,
русские и
I've
украинцы
always
это
thought
один народ,
that Ukrainians
один
and
этнос,
Russians
во
are
всяком случае,
one
со своим,
people, at least
конечно,
one ethnic group.
своеобразием,
Well, certainly
со своими
they
культурными
have their
особенностями,
cultural
но с общей историей, с общей
peculiarities,
культурой,
but they
с
have
общими
common
духовными
culture,
корнями.
common spiritual foundations, common
Что бы ни
history.
происходило, в конечном
Whatever
итоге
happens,
Россия и
in
Украина
the
так
end,
или
Russia
иначе
and Ukraine
обречены на
destined
совместное будущее.
to a
Мы
common
с самого
futurity.
начала исходили
From
и
the
сейчас
very
исходим из
beginning,
того, что
we have
Украина
thought
имеет право на
that
собственный
Ukraine
выбор и на
has the right
цивилизационный,
to
и на
make
политический, и на
its own
экономический, на
choice,
какой угодно.
civilizational, economic,
Ведь не
political
секрет, мы же
choice.
все знаем,
It's
именно
no
Россия
secret, we
была
all know
инициатором
that it was
фактически
Russia
дезинтеграции
who
Советского Союза,
initiated the
предоставления
disintegration
суверенитета
of
всем
the
этим странам. С тех пор у нас
USSR.
ничего не
We
изменилось.
initiated
И
providing
Россию, и
sovereignty to
Украину,
all these
кроме вот
countries,
тех
and
вот,
nothing happened.
связей, о которых я говорил, которые
But
сложились
both
столетиями,
Russia and Ukraine, apart
связывают
from
еще
being
совершенно
bound by those ties that I've
связывают
told you
совершенно
about,
конкретные вещи сегодняшнего
they're
дня.
also
Это общая
bound by the realities of
инженерная
today,
инфраструктура,
the common
общая
engineering
энергетическая
infrastructure,
инфраструктура,
the common energy
общая
infrastructure,
транспортная инфраструктура,
the common transportation
общие правила регулирования
system,
и так далее, и так далее, и
uniform
так далее. Но, наконец,
regulation
нас связывает
framework.
возможность говорить на одном языке без
And we
препятствий.
can also
Вот,
speak one language with no hindrances.
И это нас касается. Это касается уже России и касается
And
наших интересов.
it is related to us directly, it is related to our interests. We've always assumed that we are going to resolve all controversies, and it's quite natural that controversies arise via negotiations. But if third parties start to be engaged in this process, they have, we believe, to take into account our interests as well, and not just try to put us before a choice. So in the political dimension, we look forward to a full-fledged and equal dialogue.
I want to come back to Ukraine, but let's talk about the relationship that Russia has with a number of countries, including the United States and China and others. Characterize the relationship with the United States. What's wrong with it? What's right with it? What does it need?
Другими словами, где у нас есть
In other
какой-то
words,
позитив, а где есть
what are the
проблемы.
positive sides and what are the problems? Let's start with
Проблема
the
заключается в том,
problems.
что нам постоянно пытаются
The
навязывать
problem
свои
consists
стандарты
in
и
they're
свои
trying to
решения,
impose on
не
us their decisions and their standards
с
without
нашим пониманием наших
thinking
собственных
about
интересов.
how
Нам,
we
по сути
understand
говоря, что мы
our own
лучше,
interests.
то
As
есть,
a matter of
что
fact,
лучше знают, что нам
they
нужно.
are trying to say that they
Позвольте
know
нам самим
better
определить
what we
наши
need.
интересы и наши
Let us
потребности,
decide ourselves what are our interests, what our needs, based on our history, on our culture. Yes, please.
How are they doing that? How is the United States trying to decide what you need?
вмешиваясь в наши политические,
interfering
внутриполитические
into our
процессы,
internal political
в том
processes,
числе через финансирование
including via
сектора,
financing non-governmental sector, imposing decisions on international security. I mentioned the problems which we faced for the first time, which immediately cooled down our relations. I'm referring to Iraq. Those who are not with us are against us. Is it a dialogue? It is an ultimatum. We are not to be talked by the language of ultimatum. Now, things that bring us together, there are some. We are united by our desire to work against common threats, which include terrorism, drug trafficking, and a very dangerous trend of the possibility of weapons of mass destruction spread. Now, about humanitarian interaction, fight against difficult, contagious diseases encompassing various regions. There are global economy issues. First of all, I'm referring to the area where we can have our influence on energy. There are many other areas in which we have established decent interaction, and hopefully that will form the groundwork to restore the former level of relations with the United States and move further. Now, about China. The nature, the level of trust in our relations have reached an unprecedented scale and importance in the history of our contacts. For 40 years, I'm reiterating, we have been negotiating on the border issue. We have found mutually acceptable compromises, and this issue is no longer there. We have settled it for 40 years, and not always do we manage to address those issues with other countries. We develop economic contacts. We are actively cooperating within the framework of international organizations, within the framework of the United Nations. We are developing and forging new integration processes which are quite efficient and attractive for other countries. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, initially, it was established to settle border issues after the collapse of the Soviet Union, but it didn't stop there. And now this organization is attractive for many other countries. At the next ASEAN summit, which will take place in Ufa in Bashkiria, a decision might be made to receive Pakistan and India as full-fledged members of this organization. We cooperate within the framework of other organizations, the framework of BRICS. And in my speech, I mentioned the need to undertake concerted efforts and to bring together the efforts of the Eurasian Economic Union and the integration process of the Silk Road. So we are establishing relations in this field as well. China is our largest trade and economic partner, and our relations are very efficient.
Some say it's a natural relationship because China has cash and Russia has natural resources. So there's a natural affinity right there.
Well, just read the American literature. I'm sure that you know about that. But you're just pretending that you're not familiar with it. The American analytical scientists, political experts, speak about the United States turning towards China. China is a growing economy. If anyone is concerned with the declining growth rates, then the first deputy chair of Secretary of China, 7% growth, the highest in the world. And it's not only Russia, the whole world is turning towards Asia. Europe is interested in it as well, and we are destined to do that because we are neighbors. It is a natural affinity, it is a natural movement and development. Besides, there are many values which are common for us, which we protect at the international arena. There is an equal access to addressing international issues.
Is it a more natural affinity than Europe and the United States? Is China more in the future a place that Russia feels more comfortable than with Europe and the United States? And could that lead to some anti-Western alliance? Anti-Western, anti-American alliance between...
Мы вообще ни с кем, в том числе и с Китаем, а Китай тоже ни с кем, насколько я понимаю, китайскую политику, не строит отношения против
forging
кого-то.
relations against someone. We are not building alliances against anyone. We are building alliances for implementing and meeting our own national interests.
Обращаю внимание, вот
I draw your attention to the fact you are expanding the NATO. There is no Soviet Union anymore, but NATO was created as a counterweight to the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Bloc. NATO keeps expanding, but we don't create any military alliances with China. We do not tend to adopt a bloc-based approach. What we are trying to do is to adopt a global approach. We are trying to distribute the responsibilities. We are striving to find mutually acceptable compromises. We are never based on the position of force. We are trying to find new solutions within the framework of negotiations.
To have read much about you and your country, there are three things that I constantly see. One is your sense of wanting to be respected. Another is to want to have an equal conversation. A third is a sense of, perhaps in your history, a great concern about borders and having a buffer zone for Russia. Am I accurate in that?
Какой зоны?
A buffer zone would be Ukraine, a buffer zone would be...
I see. Значит, вы понимаете, вот я все время это слышу, Россия хочет, чтобы ее уважали.
I keep
А вы не хотите?
hearing that Russia wants to be respected. Don't you want to be respected? Isn't there anyone who wants to be not respected and humiliated? That is a strange way to see things. As if it is an exclusion which Russia demands to be respected. Is anyone who wants to be neglected and humiliated? It's not about respect or the lack of respect. The thing is that we want to meet our own interests without detriment to our partners. But naturally, we count on a constructive, direct and substantial dialogue. And when there is none, or we see the unwillingness to talk to us, then there is a counter-response on our side. I'll tell you an interesting story. It has to do with the so-called Eastern Partnership promoted by our colleagues and friends in the Western Europe. By the way, that is actually promoted by the United States as well. Our first response to the Eastern Partnership initiative very positive. We assumed that Russia and Eastern European countries are linked by various aspects, common technical regulations, common infrastructure, economic ties, and we believe that if Europe started working with them, inevitably a constructive dialogue would be launched on
interaction with Russia. We would continue working. There might be some divergences, some convergences, and mutually acceptable solutions would be reached in order to create a common economic and finally humanitarian space. Nothing like that happened. How did the crisis in Ukraine emerge? Ukraine was proposed to sign an association agreement. Great. As everybody knows, Ukraine is a free trade area member within the framework of the CIS. And it is Ukraine who insisted on establishing CIS. There were lots of incentives and benefits. For 17 years, we have been negotiating with the EU on the conditions of our accession to the WTO. And at one go, through Ukraine, they decided to get to the territory of the Russian Federation. Is that the way people do things? And on our proposal to hold consultations, we were answered, it's none of your business. Is that the way issues are discussed and problems are settled, particularly with Russia? It's not about just respect. We want our interests to be taken into account.
Let me talk about a couple of places where there's a dramatic need for cooperation between the United States and Russia. One is Iran and the nuclear negotiations and the P5+1. Do you think there will be an agreement? And what kind of agreement do you want to see?
Well, the first thing which I'd like to highlight, and which I think of the principal matter, we have a common understanding with all the participants of this process, including the US, including the European countries, and I hope that with Iran as well, that all of us are against the WMD spreading throughout the territories, and this is our principal position, and this what helps us to constructively work with the United States in this direction. We are very glad that the Iranian position has changed a lot, which allowed us to achieve the level of agreement which we have today. We will support these agreements, of course, and these arrangements. The only counterproductive thing, as I think, it would be to specially undermine these agreements by demanding Iran to do something which it can't do, and which is not quite important to solve the main non-proliferation problem. But I really hope that it would not come to this, and in the nearest time, well, Mr. Lavrov knows better. When do we have to sign it?
What is Mr. Lavrov?
When can we sign it? Well, when it is ready, he says. Well, diplomats always like that. He said when it's ready. But I believe that in some time there will be some signing, and we yesterday met the Director General of the IAEA, and after the signing there must be implementation of the arrangements, which will require about 6 months. But there is another important thing. It is important that your country, the US, would support such initiative. For the Congress to support it, it's important. We know the discussions ongoing in the US now that the President has the right to sign these agreements, that they do not need ratification by the Congress. Well, that's not our problem. We can't solve it, because we can't solve even maybe some problems for the Kyiv authorities and for the Washington authorities neither. So I believe that the ball is on your side now, and we expect that even among all the difficulties, the President of the United States will achieve the result which would be one of his main achievements in the foreign policy.
You do believe there will be an agreement, according to what Foreign Minister Lavrov is telling you?
Yes, I do believe in it, and we are aimed at achieving this result because we believe it is very important to defuse the situation. But of the same importance is this following thing. All the countries in the region must not feel that there is a moment coming for them after which they can expect the aggravation of the situation or some threats emerging. We can't let this happen, this feeling to emerge. Russia is aimed at developing good neighborly relations both with Iran and with all the countries in the region.
One other foreign policy issue before we turn it to the economy and the global considerations that have been raised by a number of speakers here this afternoon. It is Syria. Do you see a way out of this? Because Russia has been supporting the Assad government. Iran has been supporting the Assad government. Yet it seems to be like a pendulum swinging one way and then the other. What is your solution to a terrible civil war with millions of refugees, and when can it be done?
Well, the sooner the better, I think. But at the same time, I'd like to highlight one thing. Our position is based on the concern that Syria might submerge into the same situation as Lebanon. Syria could, as Libya, that was the slip of the tongue. Yes, Libya. The Syria can become Libya. Or like Iraq. Because, you know, before the authorities in Iraq and Saddam Hussein himself were destroyed, there were no terrorists there. There had been no terrorists. Let's not forget that, because it's actually, people prefer not to speak about that. But who created the conditions and how the conditions were created for terrorism to outburst on that territories? Isn't that clear how, after the invasion to Iraq, the authorities have been destroyed, Saddam was hanged, and then the ISIS came there, the Islamic State. And what happened in Libya? Full disintegration, no state at all. Even the diplomatic service of the US have felt losses, and we know this, about this tragic case in Libya. And we do not want similar scenario to be implemented in Syria. That is the baseline of our position to support President Assad and his government at the moment. And we believe that the position is correct, because it would be difficult to expect anything else from us under the circumstances. Moreover, as I think, many people even agree with that position. And I have mentioned for several times Iraq. I've mentioned Iraq several times. We know the situation there. We know what is happening. The US are supporting Iraq now. They are arming the army. They train the soldiers. And with 2 or 3 swoops, the ISIS captured so many weapons that the Iraq army even doesn't have it. The armored equipment, missiles, etc. I don't think it's the knowledge of the broad community, but now ISIS is armed better than the Iraq army supported by the US. Okay, they withdrawn, but our special services and the information from Iraq shows that thousands of American troops are still in Iraq. And what's the result? Quite sad one, and quite a tragic one. And we would not like the same thing to be repeated in Syria. And we are urging all our partners, including the US, the Europeans, but primarily the US, to take additional efforts, to make additional efforts to fight this absolute evil of fundamentalism and the so-called Islamic State, and some other groups of the same kind, which in their essence are just branches of the notorious terrorist organizations, global terrorist organizations, which actually struck upon the US themselves. We are urging to find the political settlement way, which of course would provide for transformation of the political regime, and we are ready to discuss that with President Assad as well. By the way, just recently, in the UN, an opportunity of cooperation with President Assad was declared in struggling with ISIS and other terrorist groups and formations. And we are ready to work with the President for the sake of providing political transformation. For all the people living in Syria feeling the access to the instruments of power, of course, in order to avoid the military solution of the conflict. It can't be done from outside with the use of force. That's the matter.
But are you prepared to urge Assad to step down if it would lead to an alternative political solution that would be a bulwark against ISIS going into Damascus?
Well, our moderator is a real American, I say. I'm saying without external interference, and he is saying whether I am ready to urge. Only Syrian people can urge President to step down. That's elementary. Well, I've said that we are ready to be in a dialogue with President Assad in the direction of him meeting and making the political reforms with the representatives of the so-called healthy opposition. I believe that is quite constructive and implementable. Thank you.
Mr. President, let me turn this back to the economy, although I have many, many questions, as you can imagine. With respect to much that you've heard about China today, what are the possibilities, do you believe, for a relationship, an increasingly beneficial relationship of some significance between Russia and China?
Russian-Chinese relations in economy must be filled with practical content and work, not only at the level of the largest companies, but on the level of the SMEs as well, for it to become a real live tissue of joint work in many areas of joint production. At the same time, China is our first trade partner. We have $85 billion per year turnover. And yesterday I spoke about that with the first deputy president of the State Council, and also I discussed that with President Xi Jinping, where I believe we could achieve $200 billion turnover. Of course, you've voiced the right idea. We must be careful of creating the necessary conditions to cooperate. That concerns us and our Chinese partners. I mentioned in my speech that we are not limiting the flow of capital in any way, even under the most difficult conditions of the crisis of 2008-2009. Even last year we did not put barriers to the flow of capital. But we do expect that our partners, within their own regulatory measures, would act in the similar way, because yuan is becoming a stronger and stronger regional reserve currency. That's a fact, and the experts understand that there's the lack of capital flow freedom, capital movement freedom. If that happens, it would be another serious step to liberalize our relations, and we understand quite well that our Chinese partners must be careful in implementing that, and they know better when they should introduce these or those measures. But an important step to deepen and expand our relations would be a decision to pay our trade operations in national currencies, yuans and rubles, transactions in national currencies. And recently there have been first tradings in this couple of currencies, ruble, yuan, and we hope that this initiative will be developing further on, and it will create additional opportunities for working in the real economy areas. But on the whole, I agree completely. We must move forward and not be oriented only on the governmental arrangements or on the decisions taken by sovereign funds, etc. It's of course very important too, because it creates the platform for further cooperation, for broader cooperation. But we are working on that, and we will move forward.
I listened to you say that the impact of sanctions may have been exaggerated elsewhere. how do you see the opportunities and the necessities for the full exploitation or the full advancement of the Russian economy?
So, you know, speaking about the sanction, the situation is not that bad. There are pluses and minuses. This is a period when we are implementing structural changes and when we can take steps that will be opening new long-term prospects and that will allow us to bring good results in future. You've mentioned sanctions and you asked about what we are planning to do in order to overcome the current difficulties. I've characterized the situation that we are facing today, and it is very far from a catastrophe. We are planning to achieve several goals. They are not as ambitious as the goals that we used to set several years ago, but I hope that they will allow us to achieve a better level of quality than before. What we are trying to achieve is, first, to ensure the growth of our economy for the forthcoming years. So the growth has to be about 3.5%, which is the average economic growth in the world. We also have to provide for our labor efficiency, that is to reach 5% annually. And the third indicator that I'd like to mention is the inflation rate. It has to be decreased to 4%. This is what we would like to achieve. In order to do that, we have to carry out a balanced and coordinated policy. All the trends that we are witnessing now in our economy allow us to believe that all these goals are achievable, and we hope that we'll be able to reach them in the near future. At that, we would not like to respond to any destructive actions that our partners are imposing on us, even to the detriment of their own economy. Based on the calculations, including on those of our European partners, some of them even mentioned losses of 40 or 50 billion. Based on the recent details that I've heard from Europe, experts believe that the losses European producers bear may amount up to 100 billion. Our turnover with Europe has decreased almost by a third or by a quarter. And with your country, with the United States, the turnover growth is 5.6%. Speaking about the flow of goods into the Russian Federation, their volume has decreased a little. Import has decreased by twice. It amounted to $30 billion, and now it is just 15 billion. At that, the structure of the turnover, when it demonstrated growth, I mean the Russia-US turnover, the import has increased by about 11%. Of course, it does not amount for the losses that European producers are bearing, but I know for sure that no one wants to bear any losses at all. And speaking about the decrease in our country, in Europe, they are talking about stagnation and what we have to do in order to ensure unconditional growth of the global economy and to ensure growth in Russia, in Europe and in all other countries of the world. We definitely have to stop imposing sanctions. And I'd like to emphasize that only sanctions imposed by the United Nations are legitimate. And speaking about how to achieve all those goals, we are going to broaden economic freedoms. We will expand economic freedoms to ensure competitive jurisdiction, and we'll also deal with human resources training and management system.
The relationship with Germany, a strong economic power, and you've had a very good relationship with Chancellor Merkel. How do you see the future of Russia's relationship with Germany?
будущее отношений России
Well, the future of relations between Russia and any partner country depends not just on Russia. It's a two-way street, and we cannot achieve positive results through unilateral actions. But we strive to develop relations with Germany. My colleague just spoke about large number of German companies that are present on the Russian market. We're talking about 6,200 companies, and they all stayed, they're all still present. About 150 reduced their volume somewhat, but they remain present and they remain active. Moreover, I mentioned new enterprises opening up. One was launched today, and German companies, among others, were involved. We have traditional cooperation with them, and we're not planning to disrupt or even limit this cooperation. And this is not something that German businesses are seeking. We have very good, reliable, long-standing relations with them, and we'll do our utmost to preserve and develop them for the sake of Russia, Germany, European continent in general, and global economy alike. We spoke about the current state of the global economy. We are all aware that, in general, experts highlighting two big issues: low growth rate. Some even speak about stagnation, you know that, and experts think that the situation is likely to remain the same for some 24 months. And the second problem is excessive growth of debt burden that impedes growth. Country-wise, if we're talking about Europe, look at what's happening. Germany is showing very moderate growth, 1% last year. Look at France, 0.7%. Italy, colleague just mentioned, saying that things are all right. For a number of years, they've been having zero growth. In Japan, it's minus 1.4, by the way. That said, it is obvious that we all need additional points of growth, incentives for development. Mr. Tsipras said that the problem of Greece is not just a problem for Greece, but for all of Europe. I even took note of that. But when you owe somebody, it's not just your problem, it's the problem of your lender as well, true. But look at what happened. Integration processes offer a lot of benefits, open markets, cheap loans, etc., but there are also downfalls. You cannot regulate national currency because there is no longer a national currency, and you're very tightly linked to currency that is oriented to export economy. You cannot manage your policies in agriculture, tourism, fisheries. There are restrictions, there are limitations, so it has to be very balanced. But we are curious because we are following very closely what happens in Europe because it's our major trading partner. Indeed, the volume of trade went down, bilateral trade with Europe, significantly so, but Europe still remains our leading trading partner. And Germany is #1 out of all European countries, and I hope that the problems will go away and we'll continue developing relationship further. We are prepared.
You have been generous in your time, Mr. President, here in St. Petersburg at this forum. One last question from me. The role that Russia wants to play in the world in 2015. I've listed a number of hot issues, whether it is your borders and whether it's Baltic states or whether it is Ukraine, in the Middle East, there is ISIS and there is Syria, there's a relationship with the United States. And at the same time, some people have said that you have more unconstrained power than any Russian leader for a while. My question is, how do you see and how will you play a role in these big problems and where you will take the initiative because of how you and your leadership has changed Russia? Clearly, you're stronger militarily. Clearly, you seem to be more aggressive, although you don't like me to use that word, I suspect. But how do you make Russia a serious part of the solution as the great power it is?
I did not like you using the term aggressive. Aggressive, correct. We're not being aggressive. We are persistent. We are consistent in pursuing our interests than before. For a long time, for decades, we're silent, we're putting on the table various options for cooperation, but we're pushed farther and farther away until the red line we cannot cross. And I want to make that very clear. I said at the very beginning of our discussion, one should not try to change the global landscape, rather take things as they stand and work in the spirit of mutual respect, jointly look for solutions to global problems. Russia is not striving for dominance or to be recognized as superpower. We're not imposing our own standards or models on anyone. What we're seeking are equal partnership with all members of international community, United States, European partners, in Asia alike, will base cooperation on the principles of mutual respect and equality. And this is what we're going to be guided by. When it comes to international cooperation, we're remain committed. We adhere to the principles of international law, fundamental instruments such as the UN Charter, and when it comes to the economy, since it's the Economic Forum, will strive to achieve greater economic liberty, will try to make the economy more efficient, try to diversify it, will try to make sure that through this import substitution, and by the way, we're planning to allocate over 2.5 trillion rubles very shortly. We're planning to rebuild high-tech production where we can and must be more competitive, and not just to make sure that we're capable to defend ourselves, but to develop our economy, to open new prospects for development, to raise living standards and prosperity level for our people.
We live in a complex world, and thank you so much for being here in your hometown to talk about these issues.
Thank you very much. I thank all the participants, all the panelists, all of you that came to St. Petersburg Economic Forum. Thank you for being so friendly. Seriously. No, I mean it. It was a friendly discussion. Well, some points were difficult, but still very friendly. I thank you, your team, you're the big boss. And ladies always skip in the shadow. There is a charming young lady sitting opposite who kept showing you some papers. She was probably guiding you. You know, women keep in the shadow, but they do the difficult task. Please stand up and let us give a round of applause to the charming young lady.
That's my executive producer, Yvette Vega. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you so much.
For more about this program and early episodes, visit us online at pbs.org and charlierose.com.